Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Clemons. I'm Washington editor-at-large of The Atlantic. It's great to be with you, and I have brought Halifax International Security Forum coins for the best questions. I'm going to give David Kramer a coin in advance there, pal. And I know that Wendy Chamberlain's going to have a great question for me, right? So here you go. So that's to get you all prepared for later so that we have a very active discussion. Howard, you get one too. Yeah. I know you like these coins. Let me first share with you who our panel we have here at our panel. Just to my right, we have Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones. She is the DCMG chairman for cybersecurity an advisor of the Bank of England, a member of the House of Lords, but more importantly, she was the former chair of the British Joint Intelligence Committee. My understanding is that Judi Dench learned everything about the roles that she played from Baroness Neville-Jones. Then we have Admiral Michael Rogers, who is a U.S. Navy commander, head of U.S. Cyber Command, and head director of the National Security Agency. He's occasionally in the news. Yeah. We have Greta Bossenmaier, chief of the Communications Security Establishment for Canada, called by Power and Influence magazine Canada's top spy. And we'll go there. And then we have Amos Yadlin, executive director of the Institute for National Security Studies, the former head of the IDF Military Intelligence Directorate in Israel, also played a starring role in which he told me he was deceived in a fascinating Alex Gibney film called 0 Days, which he says none of you should watch, but nonetheless is quite interesting. So let me just start out. I want to get into a variety of things. We're going to have a conversation, try to make it as conversational as possible, and I want to really go to all of you as soon as possible. So to do that and be successful, I want everybody who's going to pose a question or make a comment to do it in less than 30 seconds. If you go over it, I'll cut you off. That's just the way it's going to go. So I guess I want to start off with Greta and ask you, do spies love us?
Well, thank you for that question. And let me say it's just such a pleasure to be here today and to see you all here today. Having a session on cybersecurity, I think, says a lot about the forum in terms of placing the importance of cybersecurity in a very prominent place on the overall agenda. Let me just say, from the Communications Security Establishment, we have been in the business of helping to protect Canada and Canadians for over 70 years. It's our 70th birthday this year. So we're in the
Because they had so much cyber 70 years ago? Or?
Well, but that's an important comment, actually. We've been in the business of protecting Canadians' information for 70 years. Back in the days when we would primarily focus on communications security, that's been a key part of our business for 70 years. And over 70 years, we've now had to continue to advance and innovate to help protect Canada and Canadians in the cyber world.
My understanding is that your agency is both a combination of the NSA and the Department of Homeland Security. Is that right?
Well, I don't want to maybe make comparisons to other countries because we're all a little bit different. We have three key roles at the Communications Security Establishment. Cybersecurity and helping to protect electronic information and infrastructures of importance to the Government of Canada is a key role of ours. Second key role is providing foreign signals intelligence, providing information to the government. And we also play an important role in helping our law enforcement and security partners as well under their legal authority. So sort of an important combination of activities that are really focused on helping to protect Canada and Canadians.
Thank you. Mike, Admiral Rogers, I want to ask you a little bit about a statement you made at the Wall Street Journal Forum last week. You said there shouldn't be any doubt in anybody's minds. This was not something that was done casually. This was not something that was done by chance. This was not a target that was selected purely arbitrarily. This was a conscious effort by a nation state to achieve specific effect. And it's an extraordinary statement. And I'm interested in whether you're essentially saying that Russia achieved what it wanted in Donald Trump's victory.
No, I certainly didn't talk about outcome or effect. I talked about effort, and desire and intent, which is different than outcome. I agree. I think it was Senator McCain who said earlier, hey, I didn't really think it achieved that. I would agree with that assessment. I don't think in the end it had the effect that potentially they had hoped that it might. But it's an interesting challenge for us as a nation, and I would argue it's not unique to the United States. As we think through, for example, well, what does the definition of critical infrastructure mean in the digital age of the 21st century? Right. If you had asked us 10 years ago, is our election structure critical infrastructure? We probably would have said, well, we really don't view it that way. We tend to think of very industrial output processes, aviation, manufacturing, telecommunications. I think it highlights to us we need to think about what the definition of critical infrastructure is in a whole broader way.
Is the WikiLeaks arena and what you and other intelligence officials have said occurred, is that a failure of the NSA? Is it a failure of Cyber Command? And my understanding is that Cyber Command has also prepared its own responses to what may have happened. And I guess the question is, have they been deployed?
So Cyber Command and NSA have no responsibility for the day-to-day defense of networks, individuals, or connectivity outside the federal government, and we're largely focused on the DoD day-to-day. Cyber Command does have a mission, if directed by the President or the Secretary of Defense, to provide our capabilities to help defend critical infrastructure in the United States, but that requires a presidential or secretary order to do so. That's not a day-to-day normal activity for us.
Pauline, have the Russians messed around in your internet space very much in England?
Well, I would like to know the answer to that question. I'd be very surprised if they hadn't made an attempt or two. I don't think they've, so far as I know, there haven't been any sort of spectacular examples of manipulation of that kind. But it is something that they're doing, right throughout Europe.
I know that in the UK you've played a very large role helping to sculpt the scaffolding, the infrastructure of the UK's both cyber capabilities, but also its intelligence capabilities. And I guess my question is, now that you are more of a free person in this world, what would you say the biggest blind spots are of the UK intelligence infrastructure?
I think probably, and I think the UK would not be unique in this, is that we still haven't reached the stage where we can really seriously talk about resilience. We can talk about security, but security, is not something that stands by itself. It needs to be backed up by the capability to recover from a penetration, from a break-in into your networks. And there, I think there's a long way to go before we have actually got into a situation where the organizations concerned have a plan, have exercised it, know what each individual in a given situation needs to do, know who and when they need to inform the regulator. And most organizations these days, have an information commissioner or a regulator to which they must report a breach of any seriousness. And actually have sufficient technical and business knowledge combined together actually to recover. And there, I think, where probably all societies would still say they're weak.
Would you do that? Go ahead. But I want to ask you, when you do answer this, is where is that responsibility? Should it be more in the private sector? Should it be more in the government? This is one of the big debates going on.
It has to be a partnership. The government sets the framework, I think. In the case of regulated industries, it probably has a direct hand along with the regulators themselves. But when it comes actually to the private sector, what people have to realize these days about national security is that it's not just a government thing. It's actually a whole society thing. It includes the individual. But it crucially it involves the private sector. And they have to regard themselves as players in national security. And it's not just for national security reasons, it's also for good business. I mean, what are you doing about the shareholder if actually you lose all your data, which is your most valuable thing, to whatever process you're involved in?
I think that's one of the inherent challenges of cyber. The way we often bin problem sets. As a military guy, we love to think of geography. It's why we have a Central Command. It's why we have a Pacific Command. It's why we have a European Command. And in our nation, we have traditionally put very strong delineations between what is an inherently government function and what is a private function. Cyber just doesn't recognize these differences. Right. And so I think part of our collective challenge is, how are we going to adapt to recognize that this really doesn't recognize many, not all, but many of the traditional mechanisms, boundaries, and structures we've created to deal with problem sets.
Amos, Israel is considered a cyber superpower. Why? What are you doing so well that others aren't doing?
First, let me help the audience with the 3 dimensions of cyber. We spoke, and this is in the title, about espionage, which collecting information. There is cyber security, to stop the other guy from collection your information, and there is a cyber operation, which is if you are already there collecting information, you may do something else out of the information. You can destroy something. And in the movie, it was weapon of mass destruction. So here is the bad and the good news. The bad news is that privacy as we know it is gone. Is gone.
That's a tweetable moment.
If you think
From Amos
that,
Yadlin.
that
Do you have a
your,
Twitter account?
that your cellular phone is protected,
He's right.
Yeah.
there is somebody in the world, usually a superpower,
Right.
that can reach anything that you think that is secure. Okay, this is the bad news. The good news is, or another bad news is, that in cyber, the attacker is now ahead of the defenders. So defending is always a problem, much more difficult, because you don't know where you will be attacked. In cyber, the attackers are ahead of the defenders, and we put a lot of money in defense, a lot. And here's the good news. It is not weapon of mass destruction. If it was a weapon of mass destruction, it would be already exercised against us by terrorists, by small countries, maybe the superpowers. And I'm not sure in that. Because 10 years ago, everybody wanted to be the Billy Mitchell or the Dewey of the cyber power. You know, 19th century, Army and Navy. 20th century, air power. 21st century, cyber power. And what we saw that is not that easy to destroy a country with cyber. Because unlike nuclear weapon, there is thousands, maybe millions of cyber attack every day. And with all due respect, the effect is not that strong. Not that strong. Yes, the media is making it.
But Amos,
and you know
isn't it,
who?
isn't
The
it a function that it's
cybersecurity
not,
companies.
Isn't it not that strong yet?
Yeah.
Because one of the yet element, I think, is interesting. In the movie that you don't like, 0 Days, one of the comments made in it is that since Stuxnet, there have been more than 100 state-based, state-launched types of malware attacks in the world. And that a lot of people fear that these 0 Days malware are out there lurking in
Have you heard about each one of these under the
No,
attack
but I'm just
making any
interested in the
damage?
degree. I mean, how
Any
much
damage?
should we worry? How much should we collectively worry
See,
about?
the problem with cyber is that it's not tangible. You don't see an airplane. You don't see an aircraft carrier. And it is 0 and 1s. And very small group of people know really what is cyber. And it's mostly classified. So
Anything you want to share on that?
So you can build a lot of stories about it. But at the end of the day, cyber weapon, unlike a JDAM, which is a guided bomb,
Right.
when you deliver it, it's not explode. It's
Pauline?
Can I come in on
Yeah.
your careful
Yet.
yet? I think it's absolutely right to say these are not weapons of mass destruction, and they aren't therefore existential threats as things stand to societies. And I'm not suggesting they ever necessarily will be. But what we shouldn't forget is that we are moving into a world of artificial intelligence where the availability, and I mean availability, not non-availability, and the uncorrupted nature of data, and that's to say not interfered with, so therefore not penetrated, not manipulated, and not unavailable. All of those things are absolutely going to be absolutely crucial to a network society. Earlier on, we had a session on the network battlefield, or the future battlefield. Right. And it's exactly the same now, going to be exactly the same in civilian society. Increasingly, how we operate in society is going to be with certain things automated, but things that are autonomous too. And they can only operate safely on the basis, actually, of having uncorrupted and available data. So the daily running of our society is going to be increasingly dependent on security. Now, we ought to be able, in that world, to build in cybersecurity by design. But there are going to be an awful lot of bits of technology which are linked into systems, capable of interfering with systems that are actually not up to scratch and which are still liabilities to it and which will interfere with it. And we have several instances, of cameras being used, for instance, actually to
make
as a
one
form
other
of
trend, I think, in addition to
Let me
AI.
get Greta real quickly.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Greta.
Yeah, Greta.
Perfect, thanks. I just want to pick up on both those last conversations, and we can debate how big the threat is and the nature of the threat. But I think when we look at it from a number of dimensions, we know that our citizenry, our businesses, our government are doing more and more of our lives online.
Right.
Personally, business, government, et cetera. So more of us are online. More and more data is online, more information. We have more and more devices connected to the internet, so more devices are there. And we have different types of, the threat environment is evolving as well in terms of different players and different types of technology. So yes, we can debate at how big it is, but the reality is we're in a very dynamic environment. And I think what the imperative is, and it is a team imperative, I definitely agree with my colleagues that it's not one organization or one part of government or one part of society that has to take the only lead. It's a team imperative, this cybersecurity. The reality is it's dynamic, it's changing, and the imperative upon all of us is to help ensure that it can be as safe and secure as it can.
Greta, before I get into the mic, is cybersecurity an illusion? I mean, when the CIA director's account is hacked in the United States, it makes one wonder whether there's any degree of protection. Amos just said, the attacker has the advantage, but I'm really interested in this notion. Are we getting sort of snake oil salesmen in the cybersecurity world saying we can make you safe? Because when you look at what has been hacked already, what's on the roster of victims, they're extraordinary victims with extraordinary capabilities. And it makes one wonder whether you're in the private sector or you're an individual, how you're even going to play in that world. And I'm interested in how you see this.
Well, it's an interesting paradox because we spend often a lot of time in talking about the successful attacks. We spend much less time talking about actually what good cyber defense means and how it's actually being enabled and quantified. We put out a statistic recently, and we talked about it in the Government of Canada space, that Government of Canada systems are being probed 100 million times per day in terms of looking at what the systems are and malicious actors probing our systems. We're not having 100 million successful attacks a day. So I don't think it's an illusion. At the same time, cybersecurity, to answer your question, at the same time, there's risks that abound. We are operating, again, going back to my earlier comment about diversity of information, players, technology, threat actors. It's a very dynamic environment.
Mike?
2 points for me. First, pile on to Pauline. In addition to artificial intelligence and Amos's point, look for the increased interconnectedness of the world. As we moved into the Internet of Things in a much broader way, look for that potentially to amplify the impact of activity.
That's my point, exactly.
To see how that changes. And many of the hacks that you've identified, for example, were against personal individuals, not companies or businesses. One thing I think for all of us, we oftentimes differentiate in our minds between, well, what I do at work versus what I do at home. And in the digital world that we're living in, this is such an arbitrary boundary that many actors out there just don't recognize. There are implications for each and every one of us about how you lead your digital lives, what your footprint looks like, what are you comfortable in this digital world. I'll be the first to admit, as a parent, this is something my wife and I have sat down and talked about with our sons about, hey, this is something you guys need to be thinking about. I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is, but you have got to think about this.
Let me ask you all, and Mike, start with you, a question about the pipeline of talent out there. I'm an addict with David Ignatius novels. David, for those of you who don't know, is a major writer for the Washington Post. He's been at this forum before. And when he tells the story of the downfall of cyber regimes and governments, it's all done by a highly tattooed goth, completely irreverent, iconoclastic game player. And I'm wondering whether those are the people that you are hiring, Mike, to help us, and what that world is like, and can they? I mean, you're a man in uniform, right, and your hair's done well, and I just
thank you. I have someone.
And on a serious front, I mean, you had a problem with people that have been in your employ, and what I understand is the tailored access operation, a Booz Allen contractor, another unnamed guy who's in jail somewhere right now, who's been there. And I'm interested in the culture and whether when we saw Facebook folks up here, would they want to go work for you or any of your agencies? And is there a gap between the people with the real talent who some of them are out there helping ISIS right now, and the kind of world in which you're operating from a national
So
security
for us, I would tell you both as United States Cyber Command, a very traditional military organization, 80% military, 20% civilian, versus the National Security Agency, 60% civilian, 40% military.
Right.
For both organizations, we have more people trying to join the team than we have space for. I find the challenge not in...
But are they cool people?
Well, let me finish the thought. So I find the challenge is less getting people in, it's how you retain them over time. If you, I'll take NSA. If you come to NSA spaces, you will see individuals in the middle of the winter in Maryland in tie-dye T-shirts, ponytails, shorts, Birkenstocks. You will see transgender, gay. My comment to the workforce is, I want the best darn people we can get. And we cannot close ourselves off to it's one size fits all. It's one reason why in our model we have both a military component, a civilian component, and a contractor component. Through those three vehicles, I would argue it enables us to access a much wider range.
And do they love the culture you have, all the forms they have to fill out, all the concerns they have?
It is an interesting, I mentioned this before, it's an interesting leadership dynamic. How do you take a skill set that traditionally does not like hierarchy, doesn't like control, is not really into oversight all that much, and believes I should be given a problem set and a high degree of autonomy and left to do what I need to do? And how do you bring it into this bureaucratic, rigid, hierarchical, structured, part that I've lived my whole life in? That's an interesting leadership challenge, and we've got to be willing to make changes. And we've got to bring in, for example, the reserve component, as our UK teammates have done. There's no one size fits all here. We've got to think a whole lot more.
So some have criticized you for not not having the safeguards in place, that you have these two alleged leakers and criminals, gatherers of classified data who've taken it out. What's that story?
So, ongoing investigation. I'm not going to get into the specifics. We've acknowledged this.
I tried.
I am right. I am proud of the fact that on my watch we caught these individuals, even as I remain accountable for the fact that they were there and had been there for an extended period of time.
How long was Ames in place?
About 22 years. I mean, if you go back over the history of espionage against the intelligence structure in the United States, sadly, you will find examples where individuals had decades.
This is the time to answer your first question.
Yeah.
Why Israel is so good in cyber?
Yeah, so tell me.
And it's an issue of culture. The Israeli culture is innovation, not formal. Debriefing, young soldier, young lieutenant can tell the squadron commander what you are doing is wrong. And the eco culture, the eco climate of the intelligence, the military intelligence in Israel, basically created this wonderful young people. And we have an advantage. Everybody go to the military. So we can pick those who can be the brightest and the best and send them to a cyber unit. Call them cyber warriors. And they have a special culture that not only helping us to be a cyber superpower, they are finishing their time of serving. Can be 3 years, can be 6 years. And then they go to the private sector. And over there, they are bringing their knowledge and making the high-tech sector in Israel the leading locomotive of the Israeli economy. So we are gaining twice.
So Amos and Pauline, let me credit you. You raised a very interesting point. You're taking the cream of the crop of people that you see, training them at very sophisticated levels. They eventually leave and they create capacity in the private sector.
That's right.
And this all sounds warm and fuzzy and wonderful. Are you training bad guys as well? Do you find, what is the worry that you begin training super empowered manipulators of this world that can go out and actually do a great deal of harm? I'm intrigued right now with some of the challenges we have to take.
We are not training bad guys.
Is that ISIS or other nefarious players and other non-state actors have enormous capacity? I mean, I just want to put the threat on the table and ask, how do those folks get so good at what they're doing?
We are not training bad guys. We screen them. If we think that they are bad, they are not trained. But we let them be exceptional, different. And Mike described it very well. Some of them never graduate high school, but they were all day on their computers. They have unbelievable innovative ideas. They know how to work in teams. And in every society, in the very, very extreme, you may find people who are, at the end of the day, finish in a wrong place.
Pauline?
Well, several issues here. I mean, on skills shortage, I think it's true. Every country in this room, there's a skills shortage in this area. And you have to put a national plan in place, actually, to train people. We've done quite a number of things, including revamping how you teach ICT in schools, computer, which was so boring.
Pokemon Go
kids
festivals.
Didn't want to do it, you know.
Yeah.
Now it's been transformed.
Right.
And we're beginning to identify a professional cadre into which people can go. They can begin to see it as a career. Wasn't true previously. Government's problem is retention, don't pay. People who go into GCHQ, the Government Communications Centre, on the whole have really interesting jobs. You can retain them out of sheer intrinsic interest of what the organisation does. But it's quite hard across government to retain these people. And I think we have to reckon that people come in, go out, come back. There's a big movement now between public and private sector. And people do come back from private sector into government.
The talent caliber of the threat seems to me to be extraordinarily high. And I understand that there's Russia, there's China, there's North Korea, there's Iran. But there's a pool of other players out there. And I'm just interested in how, what the ecosystem of that is.
You've got several kinds of threat, haven't you? You've got the criminals, the criminal underworld, which is very big. And you have a black high street. You can go in. Actually, as a fairly uneducated manipulator of all this, you can go and buy your malware. You can go and buy your advisor to tell you how actually to make this penetration. There is a whole economy there. So it can recruit quite ignorant people. They don't have to be a great expert to become actually a successful penetrator of the system. That's one thing. And the second thing, of course, is when it comes to the terrorist threat that we haven't mentioned yet. But their talents there are not so much actually that they're great technologists. What they know how to do is to use social media, and it is primarily social media these days, with extraordinary communication skills, which they really do specialize in. And they're highly skilled.
Greta?
Well, maybe I'll follow my colleague's lead and give you a good news and maybe two pieces of bad news. On the good news point, we are attracting truly the best and the brightest mathematicians, engineers, computer scientists, analysts, technicians, linguists that are being brought to bear to work on the cybersecurity problem. And again, not in isolation, with academia, with the private sector. That's the good news. These are extremely talented people that are committed to their country and to their mission.
So we're braced for the bad news.
Bad news. I do think that, as was mentioned, that we need more of these people. We're down talking in terms of the educational institutions. How do we ensure there's the appropriate pipeline of folks coming up? And one of the things I've been particularly advocating for is to get more women into the STEM subjects, into science, technology, engineering, and math. I think there's an opportunity here that I'd love to see more women coming into this field. The other piece of bad news is, again, to the comment that was made by my colleague, is that the economic formula for cybersecurity it's asymmetrical. It doesn't take, it's perceived that it doesn't take a lot of skill or cost to get into the cyber threat business. There are tools available. There are, various levels of economic cost of entry is relatively low to the perceived, sometimes, results. So one of the things we're trying to do is to change that equation. We need to make it harder and more costly for people to try to penetrate our systems. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of building security and from the start, making it harder to penetrate our networks, penetrate our systems. We need to change that out of whack formula.
Mike, you're a dual-hatted guy. You head the NSA and Cyber Command. One of your colleagues, James Clapper, has said, never again should we have another of you dual-hatted people. And I'm interested in your own perspective on whether you think that having both of these responsibilities is wise from an efficacy perspective in intelligence. And secondly, some of the critics of this have said that because of this, in part, the Cyber Command has been slow to disrupt ISIS. And I'd be interested in your kind of insights on that.
I'm not going to get into this noise stuff. Let me give you my opinion. First, first to acknowledge not my decision, nor should it be. My input to the process has been, look, we're working through a process, we'll make a decision, others will do it.
But do you think it makes sense?
If I could, just let me finish the thought. What I've said is, hey, look, I believe in the long run, pulling them apart but keeping them closely aligned is the right thing to do. We've evolved over the 7 years. Cyber Command will hit its 7th year anniversary in May of 2017. In the course of that 7 years, the capacity, the capability, the things we're doing defensively within the Department of Defense, the things that we're doing offensively now that we have acknowledged in broad terms against ISIL are some really amazing work. As we generate more capacity, as we generate more capability, I'm the first to admit that at times there's a different perspective, different focus between the two organizations, an operational command and an intelligence structure. My only input to the process is we spent years building this. I think it takes us some period of time to make sure we prepare to separate them so we ensure the long-term success of both organizations. Because the worst outcome is that we pursue a course of action that results in risk to mission for either organization. And I don't think that is what anyone would want.
I belong to those who think that it should be together. And let me give you my argument. You cannot really protect and be a good cyber security guy if you don't know how to penetrate the other guy, how to attack, how to make the collection. If you try to be a cyber security expert without knowing the other side, you will fail. So I think the pilots, and in my background I am a pilot, the pilots of the cybersecurity are the SIGINT people, those who know how to penetrate the enemy systems. If you separate them, you will lose a lot. It will cost you more because you double your overhead, and there will be competition. The fact that he is commanding the two make it much more.
Well, I think that's John
right
McCain's
decisions
view, but I
taken.
think Senator McCain has a view. But one of the interesting things in the U.S. case is that while Mike Rogers appears to be running all of this by title, you know, in our system, I think the other interesting question is Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security, not under Mike's authority, has much more capacity in cyber. And is that a smart thing? I mean, I'm trying to ask a question, not a political one, but more of a one on efficaciousness. You're head of Cyber Command and you're head of the National Security Agency, but a huge block of this capacity is actually in the Department of Homeland Security.
I mean, the key to success.
Is that accurate?
Right. We partner with others.
Right.
The Department of Homeland Security and the current U.S. structure has overall responsibility for defense of the .gov domain, as well as providing federal capability to support the private sector.
Right.
And we partner with them in doing it, as we do with the FBI and other elements, both as Cyber Command and as NSA. It'll be interesting to see with an upcoming change, is that an opportunity to step back and assess and say to ourselves, so we have a structure that's been in place for some period of time now. Is there an opportunity to ask ourselves, is it effective? Is it not effective? Are there changes that we would make? We'll see what happens.
Pauline?
I mean, I think we belong to the culture that says to put the two together. I mean, if you look at GCHQ, it has two missions. It started out as a SIGINT agency, you know, with a duty, among other things, to intercept communications when needed for national security reasons. It's also the cybersecurity agency, you know, protecting the systems. And in the end,
so you're saying Jim Clapper is wrong?
Well, I don't see an innocent contradiction, and I think actually it actually results in greater understanding of the threats you face. And one of the things that the UK has done recently, and that is certainly a development in our public posture on cybersecurity, with the publication of the second cybersecurity strategy, which came out just about a month ago. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, who seems to be in the lead on these days, said in absolutely explicit terms, we will have a full spectrum capability, and if we are attacked, we will reserve the right to respond in kind, in kind. Not necessarily, I mean, you've got a number of ways in which you can respond, but we include in that in kind. Now, you've got to know what you're doing if you're going to do that.
You know, in the National Security Party set, you know, one of the interesting things, if you're at a cocktail party, are you folks, and I don't mean this facetiously, I mean it actually seriously, is your world taken as seriously as it should be by the rest of the national security establishment? And I ask this with respect to the NATO summit in Warsaw, where I was there. And if you read, you know, the findings that came out, I had the privilege of interviewing Sandy Vershbow later, that a lot, I would say almost 90% of thinking about the future of war, how to position people, seem to be in a very kind of different gravitational field than what Amos, you just defined in the cyber area. There were 3 or 4 items about cyber, a little bit more about the notion of hybrid war. But I'm interested in just your own sense of your colleagues in this room. Are they with it? Are they behind the time? What do they need to do in terms of thinking ahead about what warfare and how states are going to pursue their interests are done? And I do think, and I just want to, my own view is there is a tension that at the NATO Warsaw Summit, this was a sideline, not a central focus. I had that discussion with Rose Gottmuller here as well. So what is your view, Amos?
You know, if you think about the 20th century as the century of air power, we are in 1916. What we had in airplanes in 1916? We had airplanes made of wood, and they drove a very small hand grenades from airplanes. Not efficient. So cyber is somewhere there. Maybe it will come to 2050 or to 2080 with B-2 and F-16 and F-15. We don't really know. And here I'm fully with Mike. We need some time to understand whether cyber is a fourth dimension of warfare or some other try to be the fourth dimension, space. We spoke about space and in the late 80s and early 90s as the fourth dimension of warfare. And today space is, okay, communication, a little bit of reconnaissance, and that's it. It's not a new dimension. So we don't know yet. I think that you cut me before, but cyber weapon.
But it was with a smile.
Damn you.
Cyber weapon, you launch it to the enemy. It's not explode. The enemy can take it, look at it, if he has a good cyber defense. Otherwise, something happened.
Look at it and mimic it?
And
copy it?
Can boomerang it back to you. And sometimes you send a cyber weapon, and you don't know where, maybe not by the enemy. By the nature of cyber and the networks, it will come back to you.
Some people view this as saying already, this is happening already.
It's not happening. So it's a different kind of thinking. All our military terms of deterrence, attribution, peace, war, decisive victory, when you try to move them to cyber, it's very difficult to redefine them. And this job is ahead of us based on what we will do with cyber in the coming years.
Greta?
Just a quick answer to your question in terms of, how important is cyber seen in the overall national security context. Even beyond national security, I also think it's an economic imperative as well. So just from our own context in Canada, our government has launched a cybersecurity review in addition to a defense policy review and a national security consultation. But it's a cyber review, a cybersecurity review, I think just underlines the importance and the dynamic nature of these issues to try to get a handle on what does this mean for the country, both from a national security perspective and from an economic perspective going forward.
We already have like 40 or 50 hands going up. I hope the Mike folks are ready. We're going to go to it, but let me finish with Mike. I mean, Mike, just for fun, I heard last Thursday you were in New York, and how was Hamilton?
Who's next question?
Yeah. Pauline, your thought, or both of your thought on this question, because I've actually had the pleasure of listening to Mike in the past when they were doing the public rollout on Cyber Command. On some of what Amos just said is that in the world of deterrence, and I remember Mike you saying this on the record, that we needed to work with the Chinese, we needed to work with the Russians, that we needed to find pathways to communicate, to create the norms in this space. And I'm interested in how that because I think when you did this was about a year ago.
Right.
And I'm interested in whether or not, given what a lot of people have alleged about Russian hacking, whether that process is bearing any fruit, or whether that is a hopeless cause to try to define pattern norms and behaviors and deal with things like deterrence, the line that Amos just outlined, and whether or not that's happening with the Chinese and with the Russians.
Pauline, you want to go first?
Well, I think this is I would describe it as very much work in progress and still right at the beginning. I think the more fruitful work at the moment is taking place between allies, actually
Right.
trying to define some of the terms that we will intend to use in our approach to use of the internet internationally, the extent to which you can keep it as a free space, which is also another issue, given Chinese policies and others, as
Right.
well as the whole question of criminal use, and the degree of international cooperation that you can actually establish effectively to chase people too.
Right.
And none of those things, frankly, is yet working between the various camps in the world. So I would say that we've got a very, very long way to go before we actually get any kind of international regime of a kind that you
Right.
would think is
No,
very
I
effective.
agree.
Mike?
I mean, the dialogue's ongoing. Clearly, we haven't arrived, at a destination by any stretch of imagination. It's another interesting
And IP
aspect
theft goes on.
of cyber to me, and it's a comment, I always make within the DoD and the broader U.S. teams that I'm a part of. Cyber is a journey, and where we are today is not where we're going to be a year from now. It's not where we're going to be 3 to 5 years from now. We have got to be open to the idea of change. We have to acknowledge that given the rate of change in this mission set, we are going to have to evolve and be open to the idea that perhaps some of our initial approaches may not prove to be optimal over time, and therefore we got to be open to the idea of, hey, look, we've got to constantly assess and ask ourselves questions.
I don't know if this is right,
One thing
but
about
yeah.
assets,
Yeah.
which, we're focusing particularly, I think, on sort of the government side of
Right.
things. But all our economies, in the end, depend upon our capacity to create wealth. Where does that lie in our intellectual property, and mostly in our private sector? And this is, I think, the area where you begin to worry, because there still isn't sufficient attention paid to the security of the assets which are vital to a company. And so theft of intellectual property
Right.
is still going on. But there are documented cases of companies that invest a great deal in a given product or an invention, and it turns up in another market, you can guess which, on the market before the company that's developed it can actually get there.
I've been reading a little bit.
These are real losses,
Yeah.
and long-term losses. too.
Right, and there's a real battle going on. I've been reading a little bit about Sergei Naryshkin on the Russian side. I guess that's one of your counterparts, right, Mike? And does,
We have never met.
do we have? You've never met. We could get a video perhaps next year, or Skype in. But I'm interested in whether you think that Cyber Command that you head has the same kinds of capabilities to do in Russia or in China what is happening in the United States.
I'm not going to go down this road.
Oh. Can't blame me for asking. Let me go to the audience here. Let me start with, do we have mic runners? Right over here, let's go to Josh Rogan in the very back. So just jog over there as fast as you can. I'm in favor of
Chief of
throwing the
Defense
mics,
Staff.
but
Thank you very much. I have a
I'll give you your coin later.
thank you. I have a very short 7-part question for Admiral Rogers.
Yeah. Clock is ticking.
Yesterday, the Washington Post, a very well-respected independent
If I could, let me
newspaper-
cut to the chase.
No, I'm going to finish the
If I
question
could, sir,
before
let me
you.
cut to
Let
the
me
chase.
finish the questions.
That's
Just-
fine.
just
Let
make
me
it
cut to the
brief.
chase if I could, because I'm interested in saving us all some time.
No. Allow me to ask the
If I
question.
could, let me finish, sir, and then I promise I'll let you. I am just not going to go down this road. I'm not going to comment on anything that's in the media. I'm accountable for my actions. I certainly understand that. It's not appropriate for me. So I just want to make, if anybody else wants to go down this, you're fine, you're welcome to ask, but I'm going to give you the same
Okay,
response.
since I'm
I just don't want to waste
welcome
your
to
time.
ask, allow me to proceed. Yesterday, the Washington Post, a very well-respected independent newspaper based in the nation's capital, reported that Defense Secretary Ash Carter and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper recommended your removal over a month ago to President Obama. I'm wondering, were you aware of this recommendation? Did President Obama speak to you about this at any time? Did this factor into your decision to meet with President-elect Donald Trump outside of the regular transition process? Did you tell Donald Trump about this when you met with him? Why didn't you tell anybody in the Obama administration that you were meeting with Donald Trump?
That's Mike. We got to move around the room, Josh.
And do
Move
you
to the
think the
next.
Obama administration released this story in order to hurt your chances to become Director of National Intelligence?
I
in
go
the
back
next
to my
administration?
previous answer, and boy, we could have sure saved ourselves a lot of time, sir.
I don't believe that asking questions is a
Okay,
waste of time. Thank you.
Joseph Bahut.
Thank you, Steve. Quick question. Russia, China, Iran, what's your ranking in terms of efficiency in cyber warfare? The second question, very quickly.
I can only take one because we've got 50 questions out there. So
Thank you,
Russia, China, Iran, great question. Let me ask Amos.
No doubt that Russia and China are superpowers. I wonder whether Iran is in the same level
Where's Israel compared to them?
with China and Russia.
Interesting. Greta? Greta, comment?
There's a lot of different threat actors out there. We've talked
Right.
about nation states, we've talked about terrorists, hacktivists, criminals. I don't really want to get into a ranking game. I think the reality is there's a number of threat actors out there, and it's a very
Do you
evolving
think
field.
non-state actors are of increasing weight in this field?
I think there's an increasing number of them. It's a very good question, and it goes back a bit to my earlier comment about relative low cost of entry. So I think there's more of them trying to do different kinds of things. In terms of the actual impact they have, we're seeing different types of impact. We're seeing denial of service activities. But I think that the verdict is still out in terms of what the
Right.
real impact is.
Can I
going
add
to
on to
Yeah,
that,
Mike,
though?
yeah.
Remember, the greatest segment of activity out there is criminal, remains criminal. And those are
Are
predominantly
these drug cartels?
non-state
are they,
actors.
I think quite a lot of the
The
internet.
16 years old boy and the terrorist in the cave or in the basement are not a concern. Concerns start from criminal organizations that has resources. They have many people that can recruit, and they can reach to a state level.
Pauline?
I was just going to say, I think many of the independent actors, the lone individuals, are more in the game of disruption than they are actually of it gaining anything very effective.
Howard Dean? You're gonna be on mic because literally there are, I'm not exaggerating, millions of people watching online right now, so make it good, Howard.
This is a very quick one for Admiral Rogers, which may be classified. But if we retaliated for what the Russians did in the election, or if we didn't, excuse me, is one of the considerations that we have to wait for the right time, because by retaliating, they will then know a whole lot more about our system than we want them to know.
I mean, there's a whole lot of factors that go into a policy decision about, take Sony as an example,
Right.
where we both publicly acknowledged the activity, we publicly attributed it to the North Koreans, and then the President of the United States talked about very publicly, we're going to take direct action in response to this. We opted to use a non-cyber lever, in this case economic. And then in addition, we said, if this fails to achieve the desired outcome, we are prepared to take additional action at the time and place of our choosing. One of the reasons I highlight that is I try to tell people, look, there is no one-size-fits-all to this problem set. And every situation is viewed as something unique. The other testament I think that's important, or kind of foundational principle, I'm a big proponent of, just because someone comes at us in cyber doesn't mean the default mechanism has to be we have to respond in kind. I believe we should play to our strengths as a nation and those of our friends and allies, and we should think more broadly. And we'll see how this plays out over time.
You know, when the North Korea Sony case happened, Lisa Monaco and Fran Townsend did an event with The Atlantic, and Fran strongly indicted Sony's management and other corporations out there that weren't taking the precautionary steps that they should. I'm interested in, just from all of you, as you deal with the private sector, you've talked kind of nicely about partnership. How derelict or how with it is the private sector in addressing these problems? Pauline?
It varies. Frankly, it varies. And actually, I think you can begin to say that well-run companies have taken this aboard, and it's the less well-run companies that actually they can find themselves deficient. And I come back to what I said earlier on. There is no such thing as perfect security. You must have resilience. You must know what you're going to do when you are penetrated, and Sony hadn't got their act together.
Mike?
I think the phrase I use, it is uneven. And many companies, you know, if you look at the high end in the financial sector, you have several banks among the largest in the world that have publicly announced their baseline for cybersecurity every year annually is $500 million. How many companies can afford an annual investment in just preventative baseline work of $500 million? For me, it's uneven. And then secondly, I worry a little bit less at times about the largest segments within a particular sector and the mid and the smalls, because they don't really have the resources.
Greta?
Very much along the same lines, private sector is not one homogeneous group. And it's companies now having the realization that this is a, board level kind of issue they need to deal with. This is a business risk issue.
Exactly.
Put it into the risk matrix that businesses have to deal with. And pretty soon you'll find that people are taking this very seriously. And it's not only investment, but it's also that senior level engagement around a business risk.
I wasn't joking earlier when I read about you in Power and Influence magazine Canada. Are you regularly interfacing and interacting with private sector leaders on infrastructure? Is there a regular rapport that you're building with them?
We work, I'm going to come back to the partnership angle again. We work in partnership with other components in our government and with the private sector in terms of being able to provide advice and guidance. And we're both learning. I mean, it's a two-way street in terms of learning.
It's an issue of cost benefit. If you are a private sector company, you want to make money. If you defend yourself in a way that you spend all your money on defense, you're going to lose your company. So you have to do the threat assessment. You have to define what is a core that you want to protect, and don't protect everything because I told you, somebody will be there. So protect the real important core of your business.
That's correct.
And it's a cost-benefit analysis that you should have to do with experts.
I just want to take this public moment to thank Israel and Amos in whatever role you had in for the app called Waze. It's you may not know it in Waze, but I just want to basically put that on the table. Yes, Dixon Osborne, right here.
Hi, Dixon Osborne, Center for Justice and Accountability. We're talking about cyber threats, but can we do the flip side of that, which is government transparency and accountability? What can we do to reduce the overclassification of communications?
Right, overclassification, height of secrecy. Pauline?
Well, we've
I just wanted to, when Theresa May, the now Prime Minister of England, was head of, Home Affairs, and you told her she wasn't cleared and couldn't get a report, I just found this a very juicy moment that many people may not know. But on the issue of secrecy and who's in and who's out.
I think there's something apocryphal about this story, but nevertheless. I mean, the essence, I suppose, of good classification is keep it to the minimum. And we've had a reform, and
Is anybody keeping it to the minimum?
Well, there's always a temptation, isn't there, in any human to put the word confidential on when it doesn't need to be. We have actually recently had a real reform of the whole system, and there is now a great deal of paper that used to have a tag on it, which no longer does. The second thing, of course, is who has access to what.
Right.
And actually, who accesses to what is quite as important as what label a piece of paper or a communication bears. And there, I think that's where the real control lies. It's not in classification; it's access to it. And you have to get those in an electronic world. You have to get those two things in line. So I think that it's quite important for governments and organisations to get their and a lot of companies do have limited access, and they're quite right too. And you've got to get that in line with real responsibilities and not with nominal status. So there's a lot of things to do actually to make both your classification system efficient and not stifling.
As I go to the rest, because I think it's a very important question. In the early 1980s, a bunch of Sovietologists, Arnold Horlik was one of them, but the leading Soviet experts in the country campaigned with Bill Casey, then head of CIA, and said, the problems of official secrecy are stifling our ability to understand what's going on in the world, to deal with this. And when I think back to that time in 1984, when this effort was done, I mean, there's just the growth of official secrecy has been staggering. So, Mike, I'm interested not in the kind of soft notion that reform. I mean, is it a problem from your guys' perspective, or is it something that we just need to accept?
I think particularly in the world of cybersecurity, it's something we got to continue to get better at. I feel very good when you see high-profile activity.
Right.
What concerns me is that's not enough. We got to get this to the day-to-day, so we got real-time information flowing back and forth. And as a government guy, what I always remind our workforce is the measure of success needs to be defined by the individuals we're providing the data to, not us. What's the right format at the right classification level? What is the essential data that they need? Not what do we think they need? And that is an area we got to keep working hard around.
Chief of Defense Staff from UK want to ask a question.
Yes.
But may I just come in on this issue, though, in terms of transparency? I think it's really an important issue. And it's one that I think that we've made a lot of strides, but we need to do more. We've done our first ever technical briefing this year. We've launched our Twitter account this year. We're making a lot of efforts to be more transparent. At the same time, I think that Canadians understand and expect that we can't tell everything we do in terms of our targets or our methodologies or capabilities, because it impedes our ability to keep them safe.
I'm so tempted to ask about real news or fake news being tweeted.
But I do
I
believe that, again, this is of a high priority for me as a leader of the organization, is how we can be more transparent around our activities.
Pauline, you want to?
I just wanted to add that, I mean, not over-classifying is very important. But I think it's overrated as a problem about government. I think one of the more fundamental problems is the closed mind.
Right.
It's operating inside that circle, and forgetting about the outside world and actually not communicating with it. And that's very, very easy for the average civil servant to fall into
Just
that.
before I go here, which I will, I'm going to give you a coin for your good question. But Mike, what for those of us who sit on the outside, particularly in journalism or NGOs, and we're worried about this, what do you think our blind spots are that we're not understanding about you, that you feel that we're beating up on you too much? What do you think is the defending?
Look, the press has an incredibly important role. It stood our society, I only speak for our nation, for 241 years as a nation. It has stood us in good stead. Is it challenging at times? Heck yeah. But the challenge at times is I wish there was a little bit more of a dialogue, but Sir Peach, who's been waiting a long time.
Yeah, you got your Halifax forum.
Hi, Stuart Peach,
But you got the coin.
Chief of Defence Staff, United Kingdom. I think I'd like to go right back to the beginning of the session and something Amos said in his very first intervention. Actually, throughout human history, states and military actors have always positioned for advantage. And they're using cyber to do so now. So actually, I think there's a symmetry to the way in which cyber is being applied across the spectrum of warfare by states and, as the panel have made clear, non-state groups and criminal networks, which actually may need to be met with a symmetrical response. And one of the dangers with topical debates is to try and create something that is new. Actually, espionage is not new. Stealing IPR to save you 25 years research into new weapon systems is not new, but people are using this way of stealing information, of positioning for advantage, of being first with the story to make for success on operations. And I think there's something about the debate by being so topical and inventing new terms. I agree strongly with Amos. The traditional terms of warfare do not apply to cyber, but we need to be really careful that cyber doesn't become the real Achilles heel of the Western way in war. Because actually, we have always applied the spectrum of electronic spectrum to operations, and we need to continue to do so. And sometimes the response may not be a cyber response. It might be an electronic warfare response or a kinetic response. So I just would caution, as a military man, that the debate.
So let me just ask you before you close out. Yeah, before you close out, how worried are you about that Achilles heel question? It goes back to my comment about yet. And as you look forward, I mean, you wouldn't be articulating this in the way you said if you didn't see this as a growing concern. So as you simulate this and look, I mean, how worried are you given trends? Because this is not a warm and fuzzy world. This is a world of people that are trying to base it. So I'm interested in how worried you are about that part of the Achilles heel.
In the military operational sphere, we need to remember our discipline. Our discipline about communication security, our discipline about operational security, our discipline of not joining the social media as servicemen and telling everybody what we're about to do on operations. So actually, I think there is a discipline which is necessary in the modern age in order to defeat the things the panel talked about.
I just want to say to the organizers that I haven't heard anything about time in my ear, so I don't know if this is working. And
my airplane is.
Yeah, but we're going to go to you in a second. Rosa Brooks over here. Are we going to 11:45 or longer? Is someone going to tell me?
Thanks. Hi, Rosa Brooks, Georgetown University. Quick question. I wanted to go back to the issue of attracting and retaining top talent. More and more, certainly in the United States, the math PhD students, the smart cyber folks, are not U.S. citizens. at our universities, or if they are U.S. citizens, they come from families that have very strong ties to many foreign countries, some of which are on our not friend list. What do we do about that? It means they often can't get security clearances. Obviously, our strength is our diversity, but how do we make sure that our efforts to stay secure, we don't cut off our nose to spite our face?
Mike?
It's an interesting challenge. If you look at other problem sets where we've kind of had the same issue, like take language, for example, particularly in the wars of the last 15 years, we created mechanisms where we provided access to linguistic skill for a particular type of language we wanted them to translate or provide feedback on. And part of me is wondering, is there a tier-like approach that we can take within this mission set where you could potentially bring people who you might have some concerns about, that you might want to actually give complete access to everything. But on the other hand, they bring a particular skill, and the risk, to go to one of the points Greta made, is reasonable.
Right.
I think we may find ourselves going down that route.
Quick responses, Pauline, Greta?
Well, I mean, I think in the UK we're pretty rigid on this. You've got to have UK nationality to get into any area, particularly in government service.
Right.
I think private sector, different matter. But private sector needs to be a bit careful, because these are valuable secrets for potentially for other powers. So I think it's one of the few areas now where government remains less open, to employing people who are not of home nationality.
Right, Greta?
Well, I think to the point I raised earlier, whether it's women or having a diverse workforce, I think we all benefit from having a diverse workforce that can bring different points of view and different perspectives to bear. At the same time, we have to respect the security clearance processes that we have. So.
Right. And Amos, you have a sort of intelligence system built in with everyone joining the military, I suppose.
Yeah, I think diversity is important. Cyber need out-of-the-box thinking. And if you need out-of-the-box thinking, you better have diverse population.
Terrific. Yes, hi.
Hi, Heather Roth, University
Why don't
of
you stand up?
Heather Roth, University of Oxford, and the Global Security Initiative at Arizona State. I have a question for the full panel. I'd like to know how you all feel about encryption, particularly when some governments, or at least some folks in governments, have rallied against encryption, particularly in the UK, for instance. And if you do like encryption and you think it is good for everybody in an overall security, then how does that square with many governments and militaries' pursuits of quantum computing?
Great, thank you. So quick answers on encryption, Amos?
Encryption is one of the reasons that not every kid can break to everywhere.
Right.
Encryption is very important in the cyber realm. And very much like other cyber parameters, it can go both ways. We don't know where it's going. It can go to a place that even superpowers will have difficulties to break encryptions.
Right.
It can go to artificial intelligence or some other invention that may break encryption as we know it. We'll do it totally different.
Right.
And this is one of the $64 billion question, where encryption is going.
Right. Greta?
As a cybersecurity organization, encryption is key to how we protect Government of Canada, Canadians' information. It's a key part of how we do our business. At the same time, there's a debate going on, in a variety of countries around what happens when nefarious people, malicious actors, are trying to perhaps hide behind the veil of encryption. That's a discussion that's happening. It's playing out across our nations, and again, an important discussion, I think, to have. I'm glad the issue of quantum computing, you've raised that. It was one of the ones I wanted to come in on, if we could, at the end. We've said that, I think a number of us said that the whole challenge around cybersecurity is about to get a whole lot harder because of quantum computing. Offers huge potentials in terms of science and engineering and benefits for our populations.
Right.
But from a cybersecurity perspective, it's going to make our jobs a whole lot more difficult, which is an imperative for us to be able to try to get ahead of that curve and to work with academia to be able to address the quantum
Mike,
challenges.
quick thoughts?
Encryption is foundational to the future.
Yeah.
Anybody who thinks we're going to walk away from this, I don't think understands what's going on in the world around us. Encryption, though, to me, is the kind of epitome right now of the disconnect we have between the current state of technology and the legal and policy frameworks that we have in place. And collectively, as societies, particularly democratic societies, we've got to figure out what's the right answer for our societies. You don't want people like me making that decision unilaterally. I don't look to companies to do that unilaterally. We have got to collectively figure out what's the right answer here.
Pauline?
I agree. I mean, encryption's coming, and diverse voices of our questioners are heard in the UK, but the government is very clear. Encryption's coming. We'll use it and we'll use quantum when it comes, and other parties are going to use it. It changes the nature of the activity. Encryption, after all, can make your communications more secure. It also means they're harder to break.
Right.
These are the old trade-offs. And there's a whole debate, I think, behind the question, which is, what rights and under what conditions do governments have the right actually to break in?
I want to apologize to everyone. There were so many people I've winked at, implying that I was about to get to them, this gentleman there and others. I've been asked to wrap it. We're right near the end of the session. But I guess in closing, there's one 900-pound question that I myself worry about that I've just got to put on the table. And just want to get very short thoughts from you as we wrap this up. Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States, and he was elected. But during that campaign, he practically asked for other governments to hack. And I'm interested in the question of literacy and leaders. So both about, we can talk about Donald Trump, but I think literacy of civilian leaders in dealing with an extraordinarily complex set of challenges. And I'm interested in how each of you, whether you worry about the gap between a Theresa May and the intelligence community, between a Donald Trump and what the realities and, that you just sort of scoped out. Amos, you just said the rules are just very different in this world. And I'm wondering whether we need to worry about that literacy challenge among political leaders that do not come out of this. Go ahead.
A chief intelligence officer or a chief cyber command has the duty to educate the political echelon, the political masters of his. And this is not only about cyber. There are other issues that, since you are there 24/7, and they are in
So what grade would you give Bibi Netanyahu on cyber literacy?
He is very good on cyber.
Okay.
And
I'd say.
So it's an A.
A minus.
A minus, okay.
That's a very high grade.
Greta, how about Justin Trudeau?
Well, I'm not in the grading scheme, but I think I would maybe approach it from a little bit broader perspective.
You'd make major news if you graded Justin Trudeau, right? Yeah.
As we said in the beginning, this is a very dynamic environment. It's hard for anyone to be able to stay on top of all of this all the time. So I think it's incumbent, whether, again, it's in the corporate suite of major institutions and major commercial corporations, whether it's a private citizen, whether it's government, I think it's imperative upon all of us to remain very agile and very well informed on such a dynamic issue.
Right. Mike?
I'm not doing grades, but look, cyber's no different than any other challenge for a leader. No individual has perfect knowledge of every issue going on in the world that's going to shape and drive their environment. So the key always is you get good people, you get a broad, disparate set of opinions, and you try to come together collaboratively to work out solutions. I'm very confident in our ability to do that. There is no doubt. These are not easy topics, but I'm confident in our ability to come together and keep moving forward.
Do you think, in the Hillary Clinton debate about emails, and she sort of thought this was standard practice, are there things that we're doing today that we'll look back on 5 years from now as criminal, Mike?
I wouldn't say criminal, but as our knowledge continues to grow, we'll certainly come to realize over time that perhaps some of the things we've done historically had carried a greater level of risk than we were aware of at the time.
Pauline?
Well, I think David Cameron got it, and I think Theresa May gets it. I mean, a bit surprising that ex-Home Secretary didn't. But I think what I would say is that I think that political leaders, they don't have to have an absolutely profound understanding of the technology, though they do have to have some grasp of it, in my view, in order to be able to do what they do have to do, which is actually distinguish the right policy implications and the right policies. And there, I think that the system needs to help them. And they get the nuclear briefing. They should get a cyber briefing these days. I mean, this is they need help in order to do their job. And we should give it to them.
Well, I want to thank you. I don't know if we've fixed the spies love us riddle, but this has been an extraordinary conversation. So please give a round of applause to Baroness Pauline Neville-Jones, Admiral Michael Rogers, Greta Bossenmaier, and Amos Yadlin. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And for those of you who ask great questions, I have your coins.
Please join us for coffee.